Can we ask you questions about Jesus now?
Yeah.
What is Jesus' favorite topping on his pizza?
Cheese. Pepperoni.
You don't think Jesus likes pizza?
No.
Well, why not?
And because he only eats bread and fish.
What is Jesus' favorite show?
Blippi.
Do you guys think that Jesus can fly?
I don't think so.
Okay,
He can only fly on an airplane.
How? What's Jesus' favorite snack?
Z-bars.
How strong is Jesus?
Really strong. Really strong.
What is the heaviest thing that Jesus can lift?
He can lift a church and a small baby. A big cliff, I think.
Colin, what do you think Jesus can lift?
Boulder.
A boulder.
A house. A house. I mean the earth. Himself?
If you saw Jesus right now, what face would you make? Yes. Hey, what's Jesus' favorite holiday?
Christmas.
Okay, with your arms, show me how much you love Jesus. Is it this one? This one?
This much. I love Jesus as big as everything in the planets and the whole earth. What's next question?
What is your favorite thing about Jesus?
He can do miracles. That he loves us so much.
I love you so much.
Because he died on the cross for our sins.
Do you guys know what the fruit of the Spirit are?
Apples. Apple? I know one of them love.
Love. Okay.
And kind. They're invisible fruit. Not peace.
Peace.
And not kicking people. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control.
I love that. Jesus is so strong, he can lift a whole church. Come on. Come on. Well, hey, everybody, what an honor to be together. Thanks so much for being here. Everybody who's joining online, my name's Nate. And we have a special weekend where we're really focusing on next generation. Our kids and youth have been a part of everything. They're serving all over the place. Now, here's part of why we do this. Years ago, I was reading a study in the life cycle of churches, and it was shocking to me. On average, the average church remains effective for the first 20 years of its life, typically plateaus at year 20, and begins its demise. And usually most churches lose all effectiveness by year 50. And that's not good news, right? That's not good news at all. And here's one of the interesting things is this church from its rebirth in 1977 is about 46 years old. And here's one of my prayers, is that we buck that trend big time. And so understanding that for the past 2,000 years, one generation has taken the message of Jesus, followed Jesus, and then handed that off to the next generation. That's how we have arrived at this point. And one of my prayers, one of the things that we focus a lot of energy on is making sure that the church 30 years from now will be more healthy, more effective, more efficient at introducing people to Jesus than we are today. So we try to find our best leaders and our best theologians and put them in kids' classrooms and with junior hires and high schoolers and young adults. And this is my dream, that one day, 30 years from now, I will be in my 80s and I will be sitting right there, right where you're sitting. And I'll be amazed because this church is so much more beautiful than when I was leading it. Because Jesus is building a church that nothing can stand against. So one of my greatest desires. So because of that, I am far too old to speak on youth weekend. Like my kids have informed me of that. Too old, too dorky, all of those things. And so I'm excited to be able to introduce the individual who will be speaking. 6 years ago, I think in the next couple weeks, it'll be 6 years, I was in that atrium behind you, everybody who's in the room, and we were interviewing people to be our next children's pastor. And I knew this was a really important hire for the life of our church. And we came across a young woman named Rachel, and she was just finishing up her first year of teaching in the public school. She felt a call to work with kids. And as we talked, I asked her this. I said, how would you feel about joining our team and being able to continue to love and lead kids the way you are? But ultimately, your goal is to help them find ways to follow Jesus, to introduce them to the love of Jesus. And I still remember I was so moved. Tears were rolling down her cheeks, and she said, I would love that job. And over the past 6 years, I've watched her develop. She's been a part of a small group of people, we call it our teaching team, where younger leaders are learning how to teach the Bible. And over the course of the years, I've just seen her grow in her effectiveness as a leader, as a pastor, as a mom, as a wife, as a friend to many of you. And there's just nothing that makes me more proud than watching the next generation thrive. And so would you warmly welcome our pastor, Rachel Gilligan, as she comes to speak to us today.
Well, hello everyone. Like Nate said, my name is Rachel, and I am going to take this opportunity, because you are all here and you have to show you pictures of my kids. It is the mother's way. So this is my family at Easter. This is my husband, Josh, who will be married 7 years in May. And then my oldest is Crosby. He is in the middle, and he was just in that video, and he just gave the fruits of the Spirit. I've never been more proud. I know what you're thinking. Wow, Rachel, you must be a good kids pastor. He goes to a Christian preschool, and that was a memory verse. I know him, and I try and teach him, and I try and sing him the song, but every time I start, I'm like, the fruit of the Spirit's not a, he's like, no, Mom, and then he runs away. So thank you, preschool. And I am holding Wells. He is 2. We love him. He is our firecracker. I will say it again. He is 2. Whew. And then my husband is holding our daughter, Jovi, and she is 11 months. And I know what we're all thinking, you just can't see her face in this picture. And I agree, and I think it's worth showing her your cute little face. She's so sweet. I personally did not grow up with brothers. I only have a sister. Josh also did not grow up with brothers. And so we were unprepared for the WrestleMania that would be 24/7 in our home. And it has crafted this little adorable girl into a terrifying little baby. 2 months ago, we were at a birthday party, and she took down a 2-year-old. She had this 2-year-old. I had to break them apart, and then I had to look at the 2-year-old and say, honey, you can walk. She can't. Run, flee if you have to. But we love her. We love our kids. We are so thankful for them. And as you can see, I spend a lot of time with kids at home. I get the honor and privilege of spending a lot of time with kids here. So it only felt right that today, when I got the opportunity to speak to you, that we also talked about kids. And we're going to look at a passage in Matthew where Jesus is going to be talking to his disciples, and he's also going to bring a child amongst the disciples and talk to them about what that means to be like a child. And it's a powerful way for us to think about ourselves and to think about others. Because I don't know if you are anything like me, but I can sometimes get so caught up in how I look to everyone else, how the world views me. How do I compare to peers and people in similar stages of life to me? And am I considered great? And what I am doing, contributing as a mother, as someone on staff here, as a friend, am I great? Have I met that criteria? And I think that in some way, in all of our walks of life, there is this idea of greatness that we strive to meet. And that's exactly what happens, is we end up just caught in striving and trying and working so hard and being so consumed with ourselves and how we appear to others that we get exhausted. We're tired, we're stressed, we're anxious. And Jesus is going to see this similar pattern in his disciples, and he's going to call it out, and he's going to call it out in us as well, and he's going to give us a radical solution to this problem. So I want to explore that more today. And we're going to do that by reading the first 5 verses in Matthew 18. And we're going to stay just in these 5 verses for the whole time. So in Matthew 18, 1 through 5, at that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called a little child to him and placed the child among them. And he said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." So we see at the very first verse in this chapter that the disciples are asking Jesus, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And we don't see any context before, and the chapter before that is actually Jesus talking to his disciples about temple tax. So we're not quite sure why the disciples were asking Jesus this question at this time. But this story is also recounted in Mark's gospel. So in chapter 9:34, we can see a little bit more context. And what we see is that Jesus and the disciples are traveling, and the disciples are arguing amongst each other about who is the greatest. And Jesus hears this, knows their heart, and calls them and says, "What are you talking about?" And they say, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And I think they're asking this question because they know the prophecy. They know that Jesus is supposed to be the savior of the world, and in their mindset, they think that means that he is coming to take charge, to win wars, and to become the king over this earthly world. But what they have is an earthly mindset for a heavenly concept. And that heavenly concept of Jesus' kingdom is not what they are expecting. Jesus is not looking to take this throne and rule over all the people like a worldly king would. But in their mind, that's what they think he'll be. And if that's true, he'll have to have a ranking system. There will have to be someone first in command, and they want to know which one of them is it going to be. And we see this multiple times in the scriptures, the disciples trying to figure out amongst themselves who's going to be number one. And we see that they just, even though they've seen who Jesus is, they've seen his miracles, they've seen his heart, they are still more concerned about their standing with Jesus and within each other than anything else. And that is what they keep coming back to in asking Jesus, who's going to be the greatest? It's this game of comparison that they're stuck in, and I think it's a game that we get stuck in as well. I think we set a criteria of what we consider great at any point in our lives, and we hope to reach that goal, to make that criteria. And as kids, I think it's popularity. I think it's having the coolest, newest toys. I think it's being a friend and everyone knowing you. And I know that was true for me. At elementary school, started noticing that kids that came with casts or like ankle braces, everyone was like, "Ooh, can I sign your cast? What happened?" And then they got a ton of attention, and I thought, that seems awesome. I would like that. But I thought, casts, that's so lame. I can do better. I really hope that I can get an eye patch. Can you imagine how cool it would be to come to school with an eye patch on and people would be like, "Whoa, what happened to you?" And you'd be like, "Scratched a cornea." Okay, it's a bad idea though. I don't think any of you are thinking, "I really wish I had an eye patch," but if you are, don't. It's a bad idea. Don't hurt your eye on purpose. But that was my hope. I was hoping that I could come to school, I'd be so cool, my criteria of greatness, eye patch. And one time I even got pink eye, and I thought, this is it. There is no way I can go to school without an eye patch if I have pink eye. But it turns out that if you have pink eye, you just don't get to go to school, which is a huge bummer. And I healed, and I still thought, I was like, hey, Mom, don't you think if there was like something to cover my eye that would help not spread it? And she's like, nope, just don't touch your eye. And I was like, dang it. So around 19, I gave up my dream of an eye patch, and I moved to something else. My criteria of greatness had changed, and as I'm in this stage now, I think it's a lot about accomplishments. What am I accomplishing? Am I married? Do I have kids? How does that compare to the people around me? And I don't know this yet, but I think it continues on even when you're older. What legacy are you leaving? Are you able to use your free time and your money the way you want? And how does that compare to people in similar stages as you? And I think we just get caught up in this cycle of comparing and wanting to be great. And it makes us crazy. It makes us stuck. And Jesus sees that in the disciples' heart. He sees that in our heart. And he says, change. You have to change. If you want to enter the kingdom of heaven, you must change. It would be dangerous to stay where you're at. And so he tells us, he calls us all, change. And he calls us to become something. And in these verses, we see that he calls us to become like little children. And I've been doing a lot of research on these verses, and I think that there's a lot of different ways that we can understand what it means to become like a little child. I think the first important one is to think about the status of little children, especially in the time of Jesus. What would it have meant for the disciples for Jesus to have placed a child among them in that cultural context? In that time, children were considered more like property than people until they hit puberty. And girls especially were considered a hindrance because once they hit puberty, they still needed to be married, and there was all of those arrangements, and they didn't provide for the family. And so we don't know if it was a little boy or a little girl that is brought before the disciples, but we know that it is this child, and that child represents some of the lowest ranking people in society. And so Jesus is telling the disciples, you need to take this position, and in a culture that is very passionate about their positions, about honor, about who they are in the community, to tell them to take all of that away and become like this child would be a very big deal. But I think that we can also take it one step further, because there is a lot of people in the biblical context in that cultural time that could have been placed in front of the disciples that would have given the same message. A widow, people with illnesses or disabilities, all of those people would have also been considered low in society and could have been brought before the disciples to give that point of becoming low. So I think that we can agree that there's things about children, and there's things that Jesus wanted us to know about children that we are to become like also. There's characteristics of children that God wants us to emulate. And the first one is that children are dependent. Now, as you see from that picture, I am very aware of the dependency of children at this stage of their life. I unfortunately am not going to go home today and my children will be like, hey, Mom, seems like you've had a big weekend. Why don't we change our own diapers for the day? And why don't that bottle, don't worry about it, I'll heat it up myself, and bedtime, we've got this, we'll fall asleep on our own. I wish that will not be the case, because my children are dependent on my husband and I for everything. The things as an adult I am best at, sleeping and eating, my children are worse at. How is that possible? But they're so dependent. And I think as a culture, we have a really negative view of dependency. And for good reason. Our sinful nature has taken and warped dependency. Some of us struggle with codependency, and that's a real thing where we have become dependent on people. But the problem with people is they're sinful and they're always going to let us down in some way. I think as a culture, we love to tell the story of the independent man or woman, the person who pulled themselves up from their bootstraps. And I do think it's a great story, but that's not what God is calling us to in relationship with him. He's calling us to be dependent like children are dependent. Because he has given us grace and salvation, but there's also things throughout the day that he wants us to be dependent on. He wants us to be dependent on his peace, on his patience, on his understanding and wisdom. Because the days that I don't ask and I am not dependent on God's peace with a house full of toddlers is the day that I lose my mind. It is so hard, and I need God to give me the peace and the patience to be able to make it through. And so often, we are so set on independence that we do not utilize the dependency and the gifts that God is giving us. Another thing about children is that they are curious. As much as I'm in the dependency stage of my of parenthood, I'm also in the question stage. I probably get asked 1,000 questions a day, and I would say 500 of them are the exact same questions that I was asked the day before. My 2-year-old is terrified of the car wash. He hates it. And on our way every day to drop Crosby off at preschool, he sees the car wash and he goes, "Mama, why car wash? Why car dirty? Why wash?" And I don't think he wants to know why. I think he's trying to tell me, "I don't want to go there. Please don't make me." But he doesn't know how to communicate that. And so he communicates through questions. I think kids communicate through questions, and I think we're called to communicate through questions. I think we're called to ask God the questions that we have. Why, God, is this happening? Who are you, God? What am I to do next? But as we become adults, we become less curious. We want to seem like we have it all together, like we know it all. And so we stop asking questions and we start distancing our communication with God. But God wants us to be curious. He wants us to ask. He doesn't want us to think we know it all. He wants us to be like kids. And finally, kids believe. I think kids have some of the most incredible faith. They believe, but unfortunately, it is incredibly fleeting. As kids interact with this broken world and their own sinful nature, statistics show that kids start questioning their faith between 8 and 10 years old. But when kids are young, they have a pure and powerful faith. I loved interviewing those preschoolers. I got to be there, and we bring them in and we'd be like, "Hey, can we ask you some questions about Jesus?" And they'd be like, "Yeah, duh. Of course you can." And we'd ask them, and no hesitation, like, "I know the answer, and if I don't know, I'm now going to ask you what you meant by that." But they love it. They have this faith, and they have an awe about who God is. And I think as adults, what happens is our life gets complicated, so we think our faith has to get complicated too. But the power of the gospel is that it's simple. And it's not changing. The gospel that we maybe heard as kids has not changed when we're adults. And we do not graduate into this higher level gospel. It stays the same. Jesus stays the same. And we are called to faith and to belief. We just start to lose it. Those moments of awe and wonder start to go away. When I was a kid, my parents told me I used to go outside and I would talk to the wind. And I know what you're thinking. Okay, the eye patch, the wind, this girl was pretty weird. And I think I was. My parents are not here, they're out of town this week, so you can't ask them. Nothing can be proven, but I would say, yeah, probably. I might have been super weird. But I would go out and I would just talk to the wind. And I think at some point, because I did this my whole childhood, I think at some point it did hit me that all I was doing was talking to God. But I would go out, I'd tell the wind, tell God all of my problems, everything that was hard. And there's still moments when I will be out and it'll be sunny and there will be a light breeze and it will just hit me that God is here. God is powerful. God made all of this. He is right here and I can communicate with him. But those moments happen so less often than I wish they did, than they did when I was a kid. Because life is busy and complicated and difficult, and I lose those moments of awe. So God is calling us into not a childish faith, but a childlike faith, where we believe and we communicate and we wonder about who God is. And so we see these characteristics of children, and we see the status of children, and we see that that is what Jesus is calling his disciples into, is to become like a child. But I think in our world and in some way, I just need to know, like, what is the practical? How do we practically do this? Because I think a lot of us have been put into special roles and positions and jobs, and I don't think we have to take those away to become more like a child. I think right now, in any life situation we are in, we can become like children. And I think we become like children as adults by humbling ourselves. And I've been doing a lot of research about what humility is. I've been looking up definitions, and there's a lot of definitions about humility. Some people say it's freedom from any arrogance or pride. It's lowering yourself. A famous quote is, it's not thinking less of yourself, it's just thinking about yourself less. And I think all of those are true. But I heard something the other day that really hit on how we practically live out humility. And that's by thinking accurately of ourselves. Are we thinking about ourselves in the way that God thinks about us? Because God sees us as his children of God. And so are we thinking about ourselves in that way? And when we do think about ourselves in that way, how does that change the way we see ourselves, and how does that change the way that we see others? Because when we are thinking of ourselves accurately, we come to realize that we are created. We are dependent. We are not independent. We are dependent on him. We are created. We see that we are going to be lifelong learners of God. We will never fully understand or come to full understanding of it. We will be lifelong learners, so we should be staying curious. We get stuck in the judgments, the prejudices, the thoughts and beliefs that we have because of what's happened around us. But God's saying, no, you are a child of God, which means that you will always be dependent on me. You will always be learning about me, and you will always have to have faith in me. Even in the hardest times, you will have to believe. And so that's how God sees us, and that's how we should see ourselves. And when we do that, it starts to change us. And obviously, the greatest story of this is the story of Jesus, and how he has come and he has humbled himself and he is here to serve. But I think another amazing story to help us understand it is the story of the Princess Diaries. Has anyone seen the Princess Diaries? Yes, okay. It is the greatest movie of all times. It's 22 years old, which is devastating to learn. I was telling my husband, I was like, I think we're going to talk about the Princess Diaries because I had watched it recently. And he said, Rachel, there is not a moment in your life you haven't recently watched the Princess Diaries, so what are you talking about? And it's true, I love it. There's something so comforting about it. And if you haven't seen it, I am going to spoil it. And if you haven't seen it, you should. But also, if you haven't seen it, I'm assuming you won't, so I'm okay with spoiling it for you. You see, Princess Mia doesn't know she's a princess in the start of the movie. She finds out that her late father was a princess, and so then her long-lost grandmother comes and and is going to train her on how to become a princess so that she can take over the throne in the land of Genovia, which is not a real land, just so you know. And so she's training, and the whole movie, she's like, absolutely not. I am uninterested in being a princess. No, no, no. So the end of the movie comes, and she is going to reject being a princess. She's going to officially turn it down. And then she has a moment where she realizes that the plans that she had for her life and what she considered to be a great course for her future was all about her. She says, if I realize that I say the word I all day long, but if I thought about the people that I could impact, then I would step into my true identity as a princess and I would serve. And so the movie ends, get ready, spoiler, she becomes the princess. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. But she becomes a princess, and it struck me. I was watching this movie, doing dishes. I watched the end. I'm now sitting on a stool like, wow, I've watched this movie so many times, and it's never really hit me. Because she stepped into her identity, and she humbled herself. So she really did lower herself to serve others, and because of that, she became great. She became a princess. And I think we see these verses in the Bible that talk about like the least will be the greatest. And they've always been a little confusing to me. And I thought, wow, this is a perfect example of that. She is the least, but she becomes great. And I think that's what God is calling us into. Humble yourself because I have great plans for you. I have ways that you are going to serve people that's going to make an impact. And that's what we see in the final verse of this section. In verse 5, we see that Jesus says, change, become like a child, and now act. Change your heart before you start any action. It's not about what you do, it's about who you're going to become. But once you've become that, I want you to act. And how I want you to act is to welcome a child as this. And so I think, again, we can take this verse at face value. I think God is really calling us to welcome children. And I think we hear about how it was for children in the time of Jesus, and we think that will never be us. That isn't us. And for some people it isn't, but for some people, is it a little bit? Because is there a couple of us who walked in here today and saw it was a Next Gen weekend and thought, okay, we're just gonna get through this one. I get it. I think that we have this idea in our heads that the problem with our world is the next generation. They look at their phones too much and they don't work hard. And I think we just in our minds think it's them. It's them. But then it hits us. They're people too. They're individuals created by God on purpose. And so we are called, no matter if you're a kid person or not, we are called to welcome children. Luckily, there is some really practical ways that we can welcome children, and I want to just share 3. The first one is that we pray for children. This is a great one if you think that you are not a kids person, because you can always be praying, and there is so much power in prayer. So praying for children. I can't even imagine as a mom if someone came up to me and asked me how my kids were doing and meant it. And then they asked me, how can I be praying for your kids? I think I would weep openly. And you know what's the worst part is I don't always do that with people. I don't ask how their kids are and mean it. But we can just start there. Pray for the kids that are in your life that you see, that you interact with, that your friends have. I love on Wednesday nights, this room is full of students. We have high school up here, we have junior high on the wings, we have 4th and 5th grade in the back, and all of these kids are here worshiping Jesus. They're taking a weeknight to come together in community and learn about Jesus. And we have an amazing security guard, Dave, and he is here on Wednesday nights, and he stands in the back and he takes a video of the back of everyone's heads worshiping, and then he sends it out to his men's group. And he just sends a text that says, hey, packed house tonight, everyone be praying for these students. Everyone be praying for us, everyone be praying for these students. And I know that group of men stop what they're doing and pray. And it's such an easy, practical thing that we can be doing to welcome kids. The second thing is that we can be another voice pointing them to Jesus. As a parent myself, I know that it is my job to be discipling and leading my kids to Jesus. But I also pray that there are other adults in their lives that are going to be doing the same thing and are going to help shape their walk with Jesus. And I grew up in Portland, and my mom has this amazing group of women that she is friends with. And they are just I would describe them as pillars of the faith. They are the most amazing women. And one time when I was in middle school or high school, my sister and I were at the grocery store with one of them. And I cannot figure out why I would have been at the grocery store with one of my mom's friends, but I was. And we're at the grocery store, and she has a cold, so she's really wanting to make this hot tea mix. And what is required for it is Tang. Do we have an idea of what Tang is? Yeah, some of us? Okay. Tang is just orange sugar that you dissolve into a liquid, and then it kind of also tastes like orange, kind of. But it's delicious, I don't even know if Tang's made anymore. But we're looking for Tang to put in the tea because it's going to help her with her cold. And we're looking everywhere, and we cannot find it. And finally, at the bottom shelf, we find the last canister of Tang. And my mom's friend calls out in a grocery store, "Thank you, God, you have blessed your servant this day." And I remember thinking, oh my God, who's around? No, this is so embarrassing. But wow, as an adult, I think about that moment all the time. Because I know in her whole heart that she believed and she knew that God blessed her with that Tang that day. Because she knows that God blesses us with all the good things in our life. And I think about that so often. I think God is with us in the little things. Every blessing comes from him. And I was so impacted by that moment of her just being herself and her just gently pointing us always back to Jesus. And I think God is going to do the same thing to us that he does to the disciples. He is going to place children in our lives. And we are just called to help be another one that points them back to Jesus. And finally, we can welcome children by getting involved in the ministries that do that as well. I mean, I'm the kids pastor. I had to say this one. But seriously, I will brag that we have an amazing youth program. We have an amazing kids program. And if there's any part of you, even if you aren't a kids person, there's a way to get involved. And we have amazing partners in this community. And if you are online, there is amazing programs, I'm sure, in your communities that are helping with not only the welfare, but the discipleship of children. And there's a way that we can all get involved. And that is a way that we can be welcoming children. So we see the very practical face value. Jesus says, welcome the children. But if we also think about the idea that we are children of God, and Jesus is calling us to welcome other children of God, then we can see that Jesus is probably calling us to welcome everyone, because everyone is a child of God. There's just probably some people who don't know that yet. And even if they don't know it, we still welcome them because that is who they are. And we can welcome because Jesus welcomed us. Jesus truly is the example of humbling himself when he came to earth and dying on the cross for us to serve and save us all. And so he's telling us to just follow his footsteps in welcoming others. So if you're in this room and you are a believer, I want you to just take a step back and think, what am I focusing on? Is it greatness? Is it the criteria that I've set? Is it comparing myself to others? And if I need to change, how do I change to become more like a child? How do I humble myself today? And once I am in that place of humility, how can I look around and see the people who need to be welcomed around me? And how can I be praying for the people? And how can I be pointing them to Jesus? And how can I get involved in their lives in a way that I can be welcoming them to Jesus? And if you're in this room and you are spiritually unresolved, we just say, welcome. We are so glad that you are here. And I am sorry. I think I can speak for people when I say I am sorry that sometimes as believers we are focused more on greatness than we have been grace. But what we do know is that we're all in progress and we welcome you, but Jesus is perfect and he will always welcome you. So for every kid in this room, for every adult in this room, I just want to say that you are loved, you are created, we are dependent on God, and he welcomes you.